morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Thank you for joining my very first podcast episode on YouTube. You're currently watching this live from Sydney on YouTube. Well, obviously. My name is Issam Hijazi, and I'm going to be your host. As I'm new to this, I just want to make a public disclaimer, an honest one, that I still haven't come up with an official name for my podcast. So for now, I'll just go with the name Issam Hijazi's podcast. Well, until I figure out something else. Also, as this is literally my very first live stream on any medium out there, I hope I don't run into any technical difficulties or glitches. But if I do, please excuse me for that. Now, the subject of this episode is going to be machines and AI takeover. We'll be discussing how AI is affecting our lives in every single aspect and will continue to. We'll get into the short-term economic as well as the societal risk as well as the longer-term existential ones. In this episode, I'm very happy to be joined by a very good friend of mine, Mr. Wael Elrifai, who's joining us from London today. Wael is a book author and a public speaker and a featured guest on a variety of media outlets like BBC News, Wired Magazine, Forbes, The Financial Times, and many other publications. He is also the Global Vice President of Solution Engineering at Hitachi Vantara and a member of Board of Directors at the Alliance for IoT Innovation, a member of the Association for the Computing Machinery, the Special Interest Group for Artificial Intelligence, I'm almost done, the Royal Economic Society, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Now, before I start, I would like to ask you one simple request. As you're watching this live on YouTube, I would like you to subscribe to my channel. Just press the button right there on the corner, subscribe, and that's it. And also since this is a live broadcast, any comments or anything you type in the chat will be visible to myself as well as my guest. So we'll be able to incorporate that into our discussion or probably answer any of your questions live. So please do not be shy. So without further delay, let's get started. Well, great to have you as my very first guest. How are you doing, sir?
My pleasure to be here, Issam. Thank you. That picture you have of me, it's about 20 kilos lighter, a bit more hair, and I'm wearing a suit instead of a Hawaiian t-shirt. So
I thought it was a picture of you younger. You're just getting more handsome when you age? Is that
that's
the secret?
right. Thank you.
All right, it's good to have you Wael here. I'm gonna start with a simple questions for our first episode today. I mean, and that question is the episode name itself, Machines and AI Takeover. Now, when I wrote that and when I read it, I almost instantly think of movies like Terminator, Matrix, iRobot, Star Wars. Does it have the same effect on you?
No, I think AI means something different to me. So maybe we should start off by just talking about what we mean by AI. So there are machines, there are robots, things like
Right.
that. And that's the Terminator thing. And there are algorithms, and I think usually when we talk about AI, we mean some kind of melding of both of them, right? So AI, as it's used in the commercial world today, really just means better prediction or better clustering of data. What you're kind of talking about when we're talking about Terminator or Ex Machina, you're talking about a robot and an artificial general intelligence. In fact, artificial super general intelligence. Does that make sense?
That does make absolute sense, and it's something that I want to discuss, but later on this episode. I also want to start, with the simple questions, and this is something I ask myself all the time, and I've been asked by many people about it. I mean, looking at our times now, looking at the advancement in technology, people started to fear that they will start losing their jobs to machines. And here I'm not talking about AI or AGI or anything like that. I'm just talking about, regular machines. Looking, for example, at some manufacturing plants around the globe, those manufacturing plants are being fully automated and it requires minimal human intervention or no human intervention at all. And now when you put AI into that equation, it becomes even more smarter. It's able to predict anything, if it's going to fail or not, and so on. So that, if we take that an example, those specific factories had laid off a lot of people, and these people has become jobless. So I want to start and ask you, are we losing jobs to machines?
Undoubtedly, right? Certainly, we're losing jobs to machines, and that's been the story of economic development for hundreds of years, right? And very possibly that's going to accelerate. I think we should be careful here when we say machines. We're losing money to machines and losing jobs to machines and to algorithms. Because it's not just robot pickers in a factory warehouse or industrial machinery, self-driving cars, but even things like oncology, recognizing a cancerous lesion in the lungs. Algorithms do this better now. So yeah, there is going to be a pretty massive economic dislocation.
Excellent. So we agree on the very first point. We are at the level we are going to be losing our jobs to machines, and artificial intelligence is going to be a big player in that equation, obviously. I want to give you another.
Well, you kind of taken something else for granted. In a world where you're going to have perfect prediction and free computation and really dexterous robots, it's hard for me to predict us keeping the exact same kind of commercial system, right? If the things that we're going to compete over, if food was essentially free, the things that human beings are going to compete over or spend their time doing are going to be different. So I think it's unlikely that we'd keep the same system. So I think maybe the premise needs to be examined. And countries are already doing this, right? There are many experiments. I think there's one in Switzerland and one in Canada with universal basic income.
Right.
That's one experiment for this. I don't know if you want to discuss the economics of this later. I'm happy to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to discuss the surface of the economic of this because it's a big subject. And like I said, I mean, it's a hot discussion. Many people are fearing that they'll be actually losing their jobs. I gave an example of that, but if I want to give you more examples, I'll go with autonomous cars. I mean, many people make living now by being taxi drivers or cab drivers, but they are fearing that at certain point the cars will be fully autonomous, driving on their own, and they will not be needed. So they're asking, where will it be going? So that's one example. I'll give you another example. So for this specific show, when I was preparing for the music intros and all that, I came to a website which enables me to compose music on the spot. And I don't have to hire any band or pay a lot of money. Maybe I'll just pay $1. I'll just put simple parameters like I want this genre to be rock, I want it to be this fast, and so on. And it gave me, after click, it generated 100 songs for me with the length that I wanted, and I was able to get any one of them and have it in my show. And I did not have to hire a musical band to do that, which I hate, but for me it's cheaper. And I guess looking at business owners, corporations, everyone wants to reduce their cost, and one of the ways to reduce cost is obviously to cut labor. So those musicians who used to make living by composing music, I'm not talking about pop stars or rock stars. I'm talking about small bands who make music for small events or commercials and so on. Now they will be jobless because AI is able to create something they are able to do. So that's another example, and there's plenty of other examples. You can think of them. So my question: where will these people go?
It's going to be a similar situation as to what's happened in every economic dislocation. There have to be job retraining programs, but somebody who's making music might not be a data scientist in the future. So there are going to be short-term economic dislocations like that, and there will have to be government incentives, basic incomes.
You're being optimistic
like
here.
I don't think. Sorry?
You're being optimistic.
No,
right?
No. I mean, hold on. When there have been long, serious economic dislocations in the past, we have made huge changes in the way people are remunerated and the way they're taken care of and the social safety net. I mean, in the aftermath of World War II, there were massive economic programs here. Our economic system did change quite a bit. So I think it's very likely that we'll cope with that problem.
Well, that's again, I feel that's optimistic, and I want to be optimistic just like you. But I'm just feeling that it's a lot different what we're having now and what it was like after World War II. I mean, the population size is much bigger. Obviously, the advancements we have in technology is much more. And if we want to incorporate the AI aspect of it now and the revolution of AI, I'm not talking about AGI, just the simple AI to be able to drive a car autonomously and so on, or having manufacturing plants, or having warehouses. If we look an example of Amazon, for instance, they're running their warehouses using robots. They opened a supermarkets, grocery stores where there is no cashiers. I mean, that's going to be the future. You will not have cashiers. You will not have people driving cars. You will not have people doing warehousing, and you will not have people working in banking even.
And the cost of living will go down, right?
Well, I hope that's the way it's going to be. But is there statistic that support this assumption?
Sure. So I mean, when companies are competing, let's use the current system as the model. Right. When companies are competing, if you have a monopoly, the reason we don't like monopolies is because they own the pricing. They can do whatever they want, right?
Right.
But if you have multiple companies competing and there's no collusion taking place, there's no antitrust violations, then they've got a strong incentive to innovate, and innovation means better product and lower cost. So the cost of living will go down for most people, right? I mean, the per capita GDP, the per GDP daily, a few hundred years ago was like $2 a day,
right?
And now it's like 15,000 or something per year.
Right.
So in other words, it's grown tremendously, and the cost of basic staples has gone down.
Right. Right.
So I think, and again, this is all predicated on an idea that we have the exact same economic system, which I think is probably not a safe assumption. I'm fairly certain the economic system will change dramatically. And as I mentioned earlier, experiments like universal basic income, that's an example of that.
So, having the population size increase by 8 times, and the need for more food, more water, more medicine, all that, don't you think that will be some sort of a concern or an obstacle, for even the government to be able to fulfill? Again, we're talking about laborers, taxi drivers, cashiers. I mean, I'm not talking about sophisticated jobs here of people who studied in university and now they want to maybe study computer science or AI in order to keep up with what's happening out there. I'm talking about people who did not have the opportunity to have a proper education in order to be in a sophisticated position. When I say sophisticated position, I mean as a researcher or computer scientist or someone in technology in general. So that brings me to my second question about the wealth distribution. Don't you think this will affect the equality of wealth distribution more than it is? I don't think there is even one now, but looking at the future outcomes, do you think that what's happening in the advancement of AI will help us in that area?
It depends on the economic system we choose. Again, wealth distribution is not the only metric that matters, because if you go back, 1,000 years, wealth distribution was relatively good. In economics, there's a something that we call the Gini coefficient, GINI. Mm-hmm. The Gini coefficient basically measures the level of income equality in a society. So a Gini coefficient of 1 is perfect inequality, that one person has all the money. And a coefficient of 0 essentially means that everybody has an entirely equal amount of money. Now, even today, countries are all over the show on this. I mean, so you have, at one extreme, I think the highest income inequality is in South Africa. And, the lowest tends to be in the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Now, they have, in many ways, different economic systems. So, that wealth distribution, even in our current society, we have dramatically different economic systems. I can't imagine that we wouldn't have a system that could cope for that in the future. Put it this way, there is no obvious reason to assume it's an insurmountable problem. We know that it could be, resolved by taking certain approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to that. And I think researchers also agree to that. I mean, Their prediction that the rise of robots, and technology and AI will bring about benefits in terms of productivity and economic growth, but also they do acknowledge the drawbacks that were expected to arise simultaneously. So, in fact, some of those researchers say that robots could be taking about over 20 million manufacturing jobs around the world by 2030, and I believe that's a conservative number. So that's
Oh yeah,
that.
I've heard numbers as high as 45, 50% of any kind of manual labor by
Yeah,
2030 in the United States.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, there are definitely, but you also made another assumption here that, you said that, okay, we're not going to be able to adjust the economic system instantaneously, but we're also not going to have the impact felt on January 1st, 2030.
yeah.
It's being phased in.
Right.
People, you're not going to have all those people laid off on day one. There are going to be changes over time. Maybe it's going to be in a shorter period than it has in the past, but there's no reason for me to believe that it's going to be fundamentally different. And again, we've adjusted economic systems in the past, and I'm certain we can do that again. If there's the will to do it, it can be done. The big issue is, and without getting into too much of economic discussion here, is there's this idea of return to capital, money that you make by having money,
Hmm.
uh, and return to labor. And in a world that everything is dominated by machines and AIs and robots and so on, return to capital has a massive advantage, particularly if it's just algorithms, since algorithms have an incremental cost essentially of zero. Um, yeah.
Right.
So, we're going to have to work on that return to capital versus return to labor balance.
Okay. That makes sense. So on that note, I want to take your advice as in to something that you would recommend to people who currently working in different jobs. And I want to bring an examples first about the long-term careers and all that. And if I think of my parents, for instance, they stayed in the same job, worked for the same employer for 30, 40 years. In our times, I don't think that's feasible. It will be long term if you work 5 years for a certain employer, but then I guess that initiate the need for people to keep up to date with what's happening around them with the new technologies, getting educated and all that. And it's becoming harder and harder to keep up with all these advancement in the field. And when I say in the field, I'm specifically talking about the field of computer science, AI, and all that. To stay focused on a specific technology isn't profitable. Let's put it that way anymore. You're not able to make money if you know C++, for instance. Now you need to learn Python and some new programming languages and all that. So the question I'm asking here, I don't want to confuse you here, but what should be the people, the young generation, doing to stay ahead of the game and be prepared for basically what's going to happen in 10, 20 years from now?
I think it's not that different than what people in our generation did. We were talking before we got started here about what we'd studied. I studied electrical engineering. I'm
Right.
not working in that field. If you have a basic set of fundamentals, you understand the idea of an algorithm, you have a good understanding of math, then you can work in computer science. And more things are computer science. To quote Ben Horowitz, software is eating the world.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, coming back to the distribution of wealth and all that, I want to talk a bit more about this point a little bit here. While I'm wondering if AI and all these advancements that we have will be worsening the effects and concentration of power and wealth. Currently it's obviously with the few, right, with the elite. Let's put it that way. Don't you think AI will be worsening that if, and they will, have or grip on that technology?
Well, you made a big judgment there. You said if and they will. There's no obvious reason to assume it's the only way that can work. Like I said, there are many things that we've socialized, many things that we've taken on ourselves as a society. I don't mean in a political sense socialism. I'm just saying in general, there are many things we've taken upon ourselves as a society to do for each other, minimum standards of living and so on. At a time, again, we're still just talking about tool AI here. We're
Yeah.
still talking about solving one particular problem really well, like predicting failures of an engine or something like that. And yeah, that increases the return to capital as opposed to the return to labor. So it will generate more income inequality. And there are easy ways of solving that in a government. You know, capital gains taxes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think if you are at that extreme level of wealth, not even the extreme, if you're in the top 10%, um, there is something very much in it for you to be willing to pay higher taxes. I don't begrudge the taxes I pay because it makes sure that there are no homeless people and, well, not many homeless people. And, starvation is not a daily fact of life here in London.
Right.
Some people
Well,
would argue about that. But I
so
mean,
so
I think that people won't be that much against paying to keep their society together.
okay. Besides the wealth distribution, what about violence and having the technology with the wrong hands of people and starting to doing certain disruption? And I want to quote a computer scientist and professor. His name is Bengio. He's a professor at the University of Montreal, and he said in society
Facebook.
where yeah, and he said in a society where there's a lot of violence, a lot of inequality, the risk of misusing AI or having people use it irresponsibly in general is much greater. And making AI beneficial for all is very critical to the safety question. What do you think of that?
So first, Yoshua Bengio, I might have been wrong on Facebook. He might be somewhere else. Maybe he's even at OpenAI now. But second, this is not something brand new.
Yeah.
First, I mean, a cruise missile is an autonomous vehicle that can go attack something with pinpoint accuracy and kill people. We've had robots killing people for ages. Apache helicopter, to a pretty large extent, is a killer robot, right? Nobody, you're not throwing a rock or a spear. So conceptually, it's not that much different. Scale is an issue. There was it's like a 3-year-old video now. I think it's called Slaughterbots.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth looking up. Uh, it's essentially tiny drones with tiny explosives and facial recognition. And, we have the technology today that you could wipe out a race if you wanted, while preserving all the wealth of the physical wealth of their society. So, I mean, we're already coping with these problems.
Well,
You see what I mean?
yeah, that's interesting point. I wanted to come to that, but us talk about something at a smaller scale here. Having the technology in the hands of the wrong people. That's what I'm trying to say here. So if we take the example of deep fakes, I guess you've seen such kind of fake videos on the internet by someone impersonating someone else as let's say the president of the US or someone else saying something that he did not and all that, and it looks very real, and it's dangerous if you ask me, and it's getting better and better, and the human eye will not be able to detect if this is real or not. And looking at Microsoft now, they're trying to come up with a solution to fight such kind of problem, the deep fakes to be specific. And there's many other similar kind of challenges out there, and such tools are available for anyone, with anyone, because it's relatively cheap, it's accessible. We were not talking about even mass destruction weapon or something of that. So we're talking about something that literally accessible by anyone. It can make a lot of bad effect on the long term. What do you think of
Okay.
that?
So what if I create a Twitter account in which I call myself the very real Donald Trump, and I start spouting all kinds of nonsense, different nonsense, but nonsense nonetheless? How do people know it's not me? How
I
do they
mean,
do I know I'm not Donald Trump?
well, they try to research things around and find out, but not everybody is willing to
Or
research.
so let me put it another way. Twitter has a very simple solution for this. They give you a little blue check mark saying
Yeah,
that they've validated this person. I'm not saying that system is perfect, but
yeah,
that's just a system. It could be that the way we consume news becomes different. We reputation checking becomes a big part of it. If I want to know about news going on at an international level, I'm probably not going to check my local paper. So I think it's in the hands of the consuming audience, to be discerning about this. If I see it on Alex Jones' Infowars, Barack Obama making some outrageous statement, then I might say, well, you know, might not be real.
That's a
Can it
good
be
point.
gained? Will there be mistakes? Yeah, there will. But that
That's
happens already. I mean, there's fake news that comes out all the time.
that's absolutely true. But I'm saying it will be even worse when such kind of deepfakes are out there. The effect will be
or
worse.
you become or you'll become less liable to trust
That's
a
true.
a video,
That's
which
true.
is, that's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, people can already write. I can already write an article saying that so and so politician said a so and so outrageous thing, but for the most part, people can judge it and say, well, that doesn't seem likely. So, I
Right.
mean, deep fakes has existed in journalism for millennia, I'm sure.
Yeah. I love your positivity. So I want to get on a darker side here. I want to talk about something a bit more edgy. I want to talk about our existential risk from artificial general intelligence, which is slightly an advanced version of AI. I mean, do you want to talk a bit about what AGI first, While?
Okay. So we talk about AI in the commercial sense today. We're usually talking about better prediction, or sometimes we're talking about algorithms, programs that can play Atari games like a DeepMind and things like that. And we sometimes talk about tool AI. So, for instance, Stockfish, the standard like AI chess playing game
Yeah.
algorithm, or the ones from DeepMind, they can beat even the best chess player easily. That's sort of a tool AI. They are way better than human beings in that one thing. However, that algorithm doesn't know it's playing chess. It doesn't know what chess is. It doesn't know it's running in a computer, or what transistors are, or what the Earth or the universe are.
So
It
it's
has
not that
no,
intelligent after all.
it's not intelligent in the sense that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's not intelligent in the sense that it mimics a lot of human, conflict resolution and planning and things like that. It's not intelligent in that sense. It's intelligent in that it's incredibly good at solving a particular problem. If you give it a new problem to solve, not only would it know where to start, but it wouldn't even know you've given it a new problem. So that's the sort of tool intelligence. That's kind of AI we have today, which is not to say that can't be dangerous. That can be incredibly dangerous, right?
Can you
You
give
can
me an
make
example?
huge. So the canonical example people typically use here is this paperclip example.
Mm-hmm.
Idea is that, let's say you program a machine and its sole job is to optimize paperclip production, and it's intentionally trivial. And so it starts doing it, and then it realizes, oh, if it takes over that mine over there, it can produce more paper clips. And then the adjacent mine to that, oh, and it also needs all the water, and it needs this, and it needs that. And sooner or later, it's basically the whole world has died off because it's optimizing for nothing but paperclip production.
Right.
So you could imagine a world where some kind of tool AI runs away. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about artificial general intelligence. When we talk about AGI, we're talking about the ability of a system to learn, not just to predict something based on past data, but to learn a topic anew.
Mm-hmm.
When you come out of the womb, you have a few basic things you understand, and then everything else kind of has to be learned. And the idea about AGI is that cracking that kernel, that difficult problem of how do you gather information, how do you encode it, how do you semantically draw it out so that you can learn. And that's the idea of artificial general intelligence. And of course, then there's the idea of a super intelligence, a machine that could do basically everything better than human beings,
So in a
including
way, in a way, it is similar to human mind, human brain. Is that what you're saying?
it may be similar to the human brain. It may be. I mean, there's no law of physics that I'm aware of that prevents developing something better than a human brain. The human brain, like every part of us and every other creature on the planet, evolved over time, and there are no guarantees that everything has evolved perfectly. Look at the platypus.
Interesting. Which makes me want to ask you the very next question, Wael. So now, if AI surpass humanity in general intelligence, and becomes the super intelligent thing, then it could be become difficult or almost impossible for humans to control. I'll give you an example. I mean, just as the fate of the mountain gorillas depends on human goodwill, so might be the fate of humanity depend on the actions of future machine superintelligence. I mean, we human are not the dominating species on Earth because we're the strongest or the fastest. It is because we are the smartest. But then if there's something comes that is smarter than us, don't you think that actually has a risk on our existential?
Yes, I would say you say we're the dominant species on Earth, but if we tried to wipe out roaches tomorrow, we couldn't do it. So figure out what you mean exactly when you say dominant. But I kind of get what you mean. We can bend most things to our will.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, there are real existential risks, and it's not being thought of for the first time in the last 10 years. Isaac Asimov, the science fiction author, he had his three laws of robotics, right? So the idea was number one that a robot should not injure or harm a human being, or through inaction harm a human being. Then it was then that robots must obey what humans say unless it conflicts with the first law. And the idea behind that is to avoid,
Sounds like the
basically,
iRobot movie. If you watched
or
that.
make iRobot was written by Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
That's the second law, basically to prevent war machines. And the third law was that the robot should kind of protect its own existence, as long as that doesn't violate the first two laws. Of course, that third law is totally superfluous because there's basically nothing a robot could do better dead than alive. So it's always, the moment you give it a goal, it's going to protect its own existence. Now, that having been said here, the existential risk comes about because we're really bad at defining our preferences or defining our values, and we can get into that. There's a moral problem, I mean, a morality framework issue, and separately from that, there's a value definition issue. So which one do you want to talk about first?
You choose. You go. Pick up
Okay.
what you like.
So the morality problem is we talk about like a human morality as if we have a shared morality. We definitely do not.
Mm-hmm.
And the example problem typically used in AI, and you may have heard it before when dealing with self-driving cars and whatnot, is the trolley problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think this thought experiment from the 50s, I think. The idea is that I'm sitting on a train track and I've got the switch. I can cause the train to go left or right. The train is currently going to the right, and there's a child sitting on the track on the left. Am I morally obligated to change it so that it hits the child? Let's go through this. Tell me, am I morally obligated to make it hit the child?
Of course not hit the child or
Of
kill
course,
him. I mean, yeah.
of course not. Now let's move the child to the other side. Am I morally obligated to change it so it doesn't hit the child?
Yeah.
Okay. Now put two children on one side and one on the other, and I'm heading at the one child. Am I morally obligated to switch it to kill the two?
Well, that's difficult for me to answer. But if I was a machine, I'll go and hit the one because statistically, it's.
Now, what if there's one on each side, and one is
Um,
5 years old, one's 4 years old?
yeah, I mean, you'll say the 4 years old. I don't know why, but that's the first thing I thought of.
What if the 5 year old has a 4 year old has a congenital disease, which means they're going to die in 5 years?
Yeah,
The
then
point is,
yeah.
I can convolute and I can make the example more and more tortured to a point that actually totally rational, reasonable, moral people completely disagree on the approach.
Right.
And in fact, it gets even more complex when the human being has to physically hurt somebody, not just move a switch, but actually physically move somebody.
Yeah.
The number of people willing to do it drops dramatically. So first, we don't even have a clear moral framework. The example used in self-driving cars is basically the same. You've got a car, two self-driving cars, one ahead, one behind. This one stops for whatever mechanical failure reason. This one is going to have to either hit that one or it's going to have to drive into a pole. Who does it protect? Does it protect its passengers, the ones who paid for the car, or does it save the five school children in the car ahead? Or how does it do that? And by the way, not doing anything, not judging how to do it, is still doing something, right?
Hmm.
Because something's going to happen to those people. So we don't even have a clear moral framework, and we're going to have that discussion sooner or later. I mean, realistically, probably should have had it centuries ago because we make these decisions through action and action all the time.
That's
So that's
that's
the moral.
that's that's
Sorry?
that's a great point. I mean, moral framework. I guess this is something we're missing, and we'll be missing more if we go into the general intelligence area or stage or
Well, there's
phase.
a lot. I mean, there's a huge amount of research, a lot of very sharp people interested in how do we approach this problem.
Is government interested in this or just researchers?
Governments are interested, governments are sponsoring research. Typically, when there's researchers interested, you know, I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but by and large, it's government funding it.
Okay. Yeah, because
So
because
that's, the moral
because
side.
the assumption of people, government, have their own agendas and own programs in the back scene, and they're developing probably the AGI, and they're not telling the people about it. So that's the general assumption of people out there.
I think you're talking about the fringe of what governments do. I mean, governments do all sorts of things that you don't notice until they go wrong. They maintain the roads, the street lights, the power, things like that. They're involved in stuff all the time. They make sure that the water I'm drinking, isn't poisonous, or that if it is, somebody gets blamed for it, you know, thereby preventing it from becoming poisonous, so on and so forth. There's all sorts of things. We only notice it when it goes wrong around the edges. So yeah, I mean, the governments are involved, researchers are involved, corporations are involved. I mean, even with modern tool AI, companies like IBM, like Hitachi, who I work for, have published artificial intelligence guidelines, and those
Hmm.
deal with the things that we know about AI today, like racial and gender biases that can come up in algorithms and stuff of that nature. But again, that's just one side of the problem. In fact, I think that's the easier side. That's the morality issue. The other side is this value alignment problem. And for me, that's much harder. I mean, I can give you like an example. If I say, Sam, can you get me a cup of coffee? If you were next to me, maybe it's a reasonable request.
Go get
If the
it
machine,
yourself, Wael.
but if the machine is next to you, given that I'm in London and you're in Sydney, it seems unreasonable.
Yeah.
So when I say get me a cup of coffee, there's all sorts of things involved there. There's the power dynamic between us, how difficult it is for you to get it versus how difficult it is for me to get it. If I'm in the desert and I say, "Can you get me a cup of water?" Or if I'm here and I say, I want Italian pizza," I don't mean fly to Italy and get me a pizza. So there are all sorts of things in our language that are coded, that are
Hmm.
included there, that we don't know how to define. Yeah,
Right.
and those are trivial problems. There are of course much more complex ones we can get into, around war making and things of that nature. We're not good at defining the value that we want, and part of that, the example was the paperclip factory. We didn't know. Let's say we wanted cheap paper clips. We didn't
Right.
want cheap paper clips to the exclusion of everything else. If we say I want this machine to find me a coronavirus vaccine,
Hmm.
and I set it free in society, and the first thing it does is it infects everybody in the planet with coronavirus, because more testing, it can do more experiments. But that certainly wasn't what we wanted,
Yeah.
right? So there's issue of aligning values and even communicating clearly, what it is that we want to define. I conflated two things there. There's aligning values, and there's also stating human preferences, and neither one of those is obvious.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think out loud here a while. So, if if I want to go, in a time machine and travel 50 years ahead of now and say there's AGI available and there's super computers out there and super intelligence and all that, I imagine that machine would be super intelligent and would have similarity to how human think and function. And generally, human, they want to survive. They want to be the winners. They want to be more powerful, and they want some of us to protect the planet, and so on and so forth. Now, if I was a machine, I'm a super intelligent machine, then I will do whatever it takes. For example, if I am one of those pro green person, right? I love environment and all that. I will just say, okay, humans are killing the planet, and in order to save the planet, I think I need to maybe kill half of them, and I'll just do it. Don't you think that might be a problem that may happen? And I'm saying in this way, machine is thinking ethical. And then I'll give you another example. If I'm this super machine and I'm smarter than you as a human, and then you try to, unplug me, then I'll do anything to kill you or prevent you from doing that. Do you see that's happening? And finally, I want to finish this with one thought that is by James Barrett, who is a filmmaker for National Geographic, BBC, Discovery Channels, and also a public speaker and author. He wrote and published a book back in 2013 called Our Final Invention. And I think it's self-explanatory what the book is about. Do you think once... Say again?
Our final invention?
Our final invention. Do you think if if we did reach that level of intelligence and we invented that, AGI or ASI, will we be existing after that, or this is going to be our final invention?
I think if it's truly a super intelligence, very well might be the final thing that human beings invent. I didn't read Barrett's book, so maybe he was saying that in the sense that we could just sit back and pursue human interests, or maybe he was saying it in the sense that every human being be wiped off the planet.
He wrote it in the sense of he's a big believer and lover for AI and technology and all that, but he's saying we need to wake up to the risks that AI might imply to our existential, in this planet as a human, as mankind. And he's questioning, is AGI going to be the next step of evolution? I mean, is becoming synthetic intelligence is what comes after Homo sapiens, losing our mammalian's origins. I don't like the sound of that, but do you think this is where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about whether it's a good idea or not, and I think the first thing when people talk about whether or not it's a good idea,
so what do you think?
a debate that's raged in the cosmology community and for decades is, should we send out messages talking to other societies, to other civilizations, and what's the risks of doing that?
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason to naturally assume that they're benign or whatnot. And a lot of people say we should let them come. They're going to be benign. A lot of people say we shouldn't be sending out these messages. We should just be staying quiet and avoiding everybody, all the other civilizations in the universe. And really what it comes down to is this problem of control, right? If we believe we can control the outcome, if we believe we're going to be able to overpower them, then it might be okay to reach out. If you have a strong suspicion you will not be able to control the outcome, then you definitely shouldn't be doing it. I think it's the same thing with AI. If you believe you control the outcome, then it's something worth pursuing. If you can't, then you are creating a serious existential risk for humanity. And there's a professor, Stuart Russell, had his book, it's Artificial Intelligence, a Modern Approach. It's in its third edition now, or fourth edition maybe now. It's like the standard text in AI for the last 15, 20 years. And he actually framed this a really nice way. he thought that what machines have to be able to do, what these super intelligences have to be able to do, is their only objective has to be to maximize the realization of human preferences, however we want to define that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're going to have to come up with a definition. Number one, maximize realization of human preferences. Number two, the machine has to initially be uncertain
Mm-hmm.
about what those preferences are. Right? So it should be observing, it shouldn't be making decisions. And number three is that the ultimate source of its information about human preferences is human behavior. This is important. This is do as I say, not do as I do, not as I say, right? In other words, don't just, if I say I prefer to do something, don't just pursue that.
Mm-hmm.
What is obviously our preference. So I think that if you encode that, if you're successful at building that in, I think that's probably a good framework for a superintelligence that would not lead to the extinction of human race. And I, I guess, kind of selfishly like the idea of human beings sticking around, even past my own lifetime.
Same here. I'm into that.
Yeah.
So if I want to go back in history a while, I mean, when we first wanted to split atoms, we wanted to free energy and put it in good use. But then we ended up, creating and building mass destruction weapon and wiping cities and populations and nation. The thing is, we did not regulate that, or the scientists did not worry about the misuse of this technology or what it will come to. What I'm trying to say here
That's
is that all we have now is this very moment that you and I are speaking at, and the moment when AGI or ASI becomes a reality. Are we doing anything towards that?
Well, I'm going to reject the premise that people didn't worry about nuclear weapons. Einstein, Oppenheimer, all of them wrote very uh, strident, very clear uh, objections to the usage of the technology. And Oppenheimer is usually quoted, a quote he used from the Bhagavad Gita after seeing the Trinity explosion, the first nuclear explosion test, that and become death, the destroyer of worlds. He was not happy about this. Now, you said wiped out. We haven't wiped out nations. Human beings have bombed two cities with catastrophic consequences. People have died of radiation poisoning. At the same time, nuclear energy is used across the planet, providing relatively low-cost energy for a lot of people. So there's horror and there's benefits that have been seen from the ability to split the atom. And by the way, an enormous amount of technology we have today is based on our understanding of quantum physics and nuclear physics. So I don't think it's reasonable to say that the entire field of nuclear physics should be rejected because of ridiculous decision making at some point in the past. That's one thing. And then today, there definitely is, like I said, there's a lot of research going on in this field. People are absolutely looking at what can be done to mitigate these risks. I mean, I talked about Stuart Russell's framework a moment ago, and then there's plenty of other people out there who are running research programs specifically to combat this problem. There's the Future of Humanity Institute under Nick Bostrom at Oxford University. There's a number of other groups here that are doing similar research about protecting humanity in the long term. I don't think just because there's been a negative usage of the technology that we should throw it out altogether.
Right, that's fair. So don't you think that mankind would live happily ever after if we just live with ANI or artificial narrow intelligence? Why do we need to reach AGI? What's the value if there are risks of getting there? Why do you wanna reach that stage?
There's risks and things all the time. I mean, yeah, me and you are living very, very, very good lives. I suspect we're both in the 1%. There's a billion people on the planet with less than $2 a day equivalent spend. They're not living good lives. So, the lowering costs, the lowering costs of producing food, of producing shelter, of getting clean water, of providing medicine, those are noble goals. And as long as we manage the economic fallout, I think it's absolutely noble for us to keep pursuing this. We manage economic fallout in the short term, and we keep researching how do we encode these human preferences. How do we make sure that this doesn't run away with itself. I mean, the bottom line is, like with nuclear power, there were two nuclear bombs, dropped in 1945, and there haven't been any since then.
Right. Right. So wow, all that we've discussed here today, falls under what people refer to as singularity. Summing it all up, how long do you think are we far from that singularity? And if I want to quote some of the people who are in the field, like Ray Kurzweil, sorry, who's an American inventor and futurist, he believes that the singularity will occur approximately in 2045. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so I can, there are some people who believe that worrying about the singularity and worrying about the existential risks of artificial intelligence today is like us worrying about the risk of overpopulation on Alpha Centauri. Alpha Centauri, light system, the star system 4 light years away. It's the idea of worrying about that is so far in the future, we needn't worry about it. On the other hand, if as a society we were expending all of our efforts and billions of dollars in research every year on how to overpopulate Alpha Centauri, then you might want to worry about it. And that's what's happening now. We are spending billions of dollars every year to crack this artificial superintelligence problem. So we should be worried about that. When do I believe that's going to come about? I actually think it's probably going to come out sometime towards the end of this century. I'd be surprised to see it earlier. I mean, self-driving cars
Why?
have existed. Well, I mean, technology always takes much longer than we think. These things usually don't happen in one massive development. Usually it happens in fits and starts. Um, there's a huge number of problems that need to be cracked to get there. So I think it's unlikely, if it's even possible. We don't know that there's no law of the universe that says human beings have to be able to crack this. So possibly we can never do it. I think it's most likely towards the end of this century because these technology things always take longer than people think. Self-driving cars is not a new thing. People have been thinking about that for 100 years and have solved it in various formats over the last 100 years. And we're still not there. And I think anyone who thinks we're going to have the road only populated by self-driving cars in the next 30 years, I think is being overly optimistic.
Well, I mean, you said that there are billions being poured into researches into this topic as we speak. But I personally and many others believes also some governments around the world are having their own researches, which they are not sharing with the world. Aren't you worried about those researches that happens in underground labs and all that?
I don't know why I would worry about that more than I'd worry about a corporation doing it.
Fair enough.
I don't see what I don't see what kind of value system is going to be. In fact, I perfectly honest with you, I'd rather see governments doing it.
Well, it depends which
And
government.
well, I'm an optimist, and I generally believe most governments uh, the sense of responsibility to humanity at large. This idea of universal jurisdiction is a 17th century philosophical idea that governments don't just have responsibility to their own people, but have to all society. And I think that feeling is more so today than it ever was. I mean, maybe there are political things where we think so and so country or this country or that country aren't adhering to that, but sooner or later, I think those get checked by the international community. And I don't think governments can do it by themselves anyway. I mean, when we say governments are researching, what governments are usually doing is giving money to universities who are doing the researching.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's keep it optimistic. I like your optimism, and I'll keep it there. Okay, so since we're left with 4 minutes while here for our 1 hour podcast, I want to answer some of the questions that came in live. We've got a question here that came from Cool Fox, and he's saying, why many people fear about losing their jobs to machines while human history is full of positive sides provided by various revolutions, in particular industrial ones? Is it all about the scale? Would you answer that well?
Yes, we talked about that a little bit. People's main concern absolutely is that that it might all happen on day one. And I just don't think that's a realistic fear. And, built into that question, fear about losing your job, it's not about fear about losing your job. It's probably a fear about losing your income. You could still do that job even if you weren't getting paid for it, in theory. Uh, so it's really fear about losing your income. So as long as we can manage that side of it, make sure that we don't push people in starvation conditions, then I think we're going to be okay. But the fear is absolutely warranted because,
Yeah.
we haven't built that new economic system, but we can. It's not beyond the realm of human capability.
Right. Okay. And
So cool Fox should be cool Fox should be thinking about promoting things like the universal basic income today to make sure that it's in place when these dislocations really start happening.
Yeah, well, he adds, to his questions, and he says, "Don't you think that AI are just tools that have no specific dark side? It's what people will do with it that will determine whether AI is gonna enhance our life or make it hard." And I agree with that line. What do you think?
That's true if it's tool AI. It's very specific. If it's a super intelligence, then it could very well be malicious,
Yeah.
right? Unless you make sure you've done something to mitigate them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I wanna end this show on a positive note here, so let's keep it there. And while I want to really thank you very much for joining me in this, very first live episode of this podcast. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I mean, this hour went really fast. It was insightful for me and hopefully to the audience and people who were watching this live. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
All right, so this marks the end of our show, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining this very first live episode. And before we end, I would like to ask you to subscribe to my channel. Just simply go and click this button right there. It's very simple, very fast. Like this video, share it with your friends, families, colleagues, add comments, and let's continue this chat later on. Until we meet in our next episode, take care and be safe. Cheers.